A man who once had everything, but when faced with the death of his son, he realized that money and power couldn't save a life. This is the story of Robert Hargrove, a powerful man when his son, Johnson, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctors gave a hopeless verdict, but there was one woman with no fame, no degrees, who decided not to accept the fate that had been sealed. Emma, the housekeeper, saw something that the experts couldn't, and she changed everything. This story is not just about a battle against death, but a struggle between faith and despair, between power and unconditional love. What can a housekeeper do when facing top doctors? Watch this emotional journey to uncover the miracle that unfolds. The October rain tapped against the glass window, a steady pitter-patter, like a ticking clock counting down the moments. In the large, luxurious conference room, the sound of the rain blended with a suffocating silence. Robert Hargrove, a man known as the Tech King, sat ramrod straight in his leather chair, but his shoulders were stooped under a heavy weight. Just a few hours earlier, he had completed a multi-billion-dollar deal without a single blink. But now, in front of 5 doctors, the miracle workers he had summoned from all over the country, he was nothing more than a helpless father. "Mr. Hargrove, we have reviewed all the results." One doctor, his voice calm but cold, began. He flipped through X-ray and MRI scans, blurry black and white images. To Robert, they were not medical films, but a painting of death enveloping his son. "The tumor has wrapped tightly around the trachea and spread to the lungs. Surgery is impossible. It's too dangerous. Any intervention could cause the boy to pass away on the operating table." Another doctor chimed in, his voice full of sympathy, the very thing Robert hated most right now. "We have tried to find treatment protocols, but this type of cancer is too rare and too aggressive. Neither medication nor radiation will have any effect. We honestly advise you to prepare for the worst." 2 months. A third doctor who had glanced at Johnson's file said like a final verdict, "The boy only has about 2 months left. Please spend the remaining time meaningfully with him." Robert said nothing. He looked at the 5 faces, one of professional detachment, one of distant sympathy, one of inherent weariness. They had seen hundreds, thousands of similar cases, and Johnson was just one of them. But to Robert, Johnson was the whole world. 7 years ago, he had lost his beloved wife when she gave birth to Johnson. Since then, the boy was everything to him, the reason for him to live, to fight. Now he felt as if he was losing Johnson for the second time. The conference room, with its oak-paneled walls and luxurious leather chairs, suddenly became a prison holding his helplessness captive. Money and power, things he had spent his life accumulating, couldn't buy his son even one more day of life. Life in Robert's lavish mansion suddenly turned a bleak gray. Johnson's clear laughter was replaced by heavy coughs and labored breaths. The boy who used to run all over the vast garden was now confined to a wheelchair, his weak body unable to move on its own. The once bright eyes now carried an indescribable sadness. Robert tried to hide his pain. He spent all his time with his son, helping Johnson eat, adjusting the oxygen tube, and sitting quietly beside him as he watched cartoons. There were times when Johnson tried to lift a cup, but his hands were too weak, and the cup fell shattering on the floor. The sound of it breaking sliced into Robert's heart like a sharp knife. It was a reminder that little by little, his son's life was falling apart. Sometimes Johnson would quietly ask, "Daddy, why can't I get better?" Robert didn't know how to answer. He couldn't lie, but he couldn't tell the cruel truth either. His silence was a painful confirmation. Johnson wasn't afraid of death. He simply didn't understand why he couldn't run and talk like he used to. The large mansion, once filled with laughter, now felt narrow and stifling. The air was always heavy, and everyone was waiting for an inevitable end. In that mansion, there was one person who refused to accept the doctor's verdict. That was Emma, the housekeeper. She had no degrees, no reputation, and no power, but she had one thing no one else had: presence. Emma had been by Johnson's side for 3 years, from early morning until late at night. She was the one who lifted the boy into a warm bath, prepared his medicine on time, and soothed him every time the pain came. A few years ago, Emma had gone through a tragedy. Her daughter, a lively little girl, also fell suddenly ill. The doctors initially diagnosed it as a common fever, and by the time the truth was discovered, it was too late. That pain was etched into Emma's soul, turning her into a person who always questioned, never blindly trusting. She spent her nights reading medical documents, researching rare diseases, learning how to read lab results, and listening for what the doctors weren't saying. While everyone from Robert to his friends looked at Johnson with pity, Emma saw something different. Johnson, though weak, was still fighting. His eyes still lit up when he watched cartoons. He still tried to tell small jokes when he had the strength, and he still talked about the future. "When I'm better, I'll play soccer with you, Daddy, and I'll run all over this garden." Those words, those sparkling glimmers in Johnson's eyes, could not belong to a dying person. Emma had seen death in her daughter's eyes. It was not like this. She knew Johnson was very weak, but she believed his spirit was still intact, strong, and full of hope. The pain from her past had become the motivation for her never to accept a truth imposed by others. She had been silent for too long. Now she would not be silent anymore. That afternoon, a heavy rain poured down on the city. The sky was gray, covering the mansion, as if it wanted to swallow every last ray of light. In Johnson's bedroom, the atmosphere became unusually quiet. The boy lay on the bed, his body exhausted, his breathing faint. Emma sat beside him using a handheld ultrasound machine, a compact device she had bought herself to help massage the cramped muscles in his neck and chest. She moved the probe gently, feeling every muscle fiber, every weak breath of Johnson's. Suddenly, Johnson looked up at her. His eyes no longer held their usual tiredness, but a deep sadness, a big question left unspoken. Then, in a whisper almost inaudible, the boy asked, "Mommy, will I live?" Those words were like a sharp knife piercing straight into Emma's heart. She froze. Her hands began to tremble. More than anything else, this was the question Johnson had asked his father a few days before, and the answer was only a painful silence. Johnson had realized his father couldn't answer. And now the boy had asked that question to the person he trusted most. The question wasn't just a doubt, but a desperate plea. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. She couldn't let Johnson face silence again. But she couldn't lie either. She tried to stay calm, taking a deep breath. Gathering all her strength, she placed her other hand on Johnson's chest, as if to offer silent encouragement. In that moment, her eyes inadvertently glanced at the ultrasound screen. And then she saw it. A blurry image, yet incredibly clear. It was a dark, round mass located in a completely different position from the descriptions in the medical records. It wasn't a spreading tumor, but a single separate mass right next to the tracheal cartilage. Emma's heart pounded. She moved the probe back and forth, zooming in on the image, and the mass remained there, surprisingly clear. She had looked at Johnson's records hundreds of times and had never seen this image before. Just then, Robert walked into the room. He had just returned from a meeting and wanted to spend time with his son. He didn't expect to walk into this very moment of fate. He heard his son's last words, "Will I live, Mommy?" His heart constricted. Robert stood motionless, his hands hanging limp. A feeling of extreme helplessness and pain overwhelmed him. He had been unable to answer that question, and now it was being asked again by his own son. Emma knew she had to speak. She couldn't let Johnson live in silence any longer. She looked at Johnson, then at Robert, and then back at the ultrasound screen. She quickly wiped away her tears, took a deep breath, and said in a firm, loving voice, "You will live, my love. Your second mom will find a way." Those words weren't a comfort, but a promise, a commitment from the depths of her heart. Robert looked at Emma in surprise. She had never been so resolute. She pointed to the ultrasound screen. "Look, this isn't in the records. Maybe it's new or they missed it." Robert stepped closer. He didn't understand anything about ultrasound, but he trusted Emma's intuition. He had seen her dedication to Johnson, and he knew she wasn't lying. For the first time in months, a small glimmer of hope flickered in Robert's heart. The room became silent. But it wasn't the silence of despair. It was the silence of newfound belief. Emma carefully saved the ultrasound image and noted down her observations. She compared the shape, position, and size of the mass with the old images. What she saw did not match the initial diagnosis. It wasn't a spreading tumor, but a clear, distinct, and round mass. In Emma's heart, the initial doubt had now turned into a fierce conviction. She had ignored her intuition once before, and the price was her daughter's life. She would never make that mistake again. She knew Johnson was fighting, and she would fight with him. Robert sat down on the edge of the bed, taking Johnson's hand. His silence was no longer the silence of fear, but the silence of hope. Johnson smiled weakly. He didn't understand what had happened, but Emma's answer had brought him peace. Emma turned off the ultrasound machine, gently helped Johnson lie down, and tucked him in. She bent down and kissed his forehead. Johnson had fallen asleep with a smile on his lips. Robert was still looking at the ultrasound screen, his mind spinning. Finally, he looked at Emma and said, "Who do you want to send this image to?" "Not our doctors," Emma replied. "Someone else." Robert nodded. He didn't object. If Emma believed there was a chance, he would support her. The rain outside continued to fall, but inside the room something had changed. A question that should have killed hope had instead become the motivation for them to seek a new truth. Emma didn't waste a second. She printed all of Johnson's medical reports, copied the ultrasound video, and her notes onto a USB drive. She remembered someone who could help Dr. Albert, a retired doctor, and a close friend of her sister's. He was known for his ability to analyze rare cases. Early the next morning, Emma called and asked to visit him. When she arrived, Dr. Albert greeted her warmly. They sat down at the dining table, and Emma began to tell the story. She handed him the USB and waited in extreme anxiety. Dr. Albert plugged the USB into his computer. He watched the video once, then watched it again. He zoomed in, adjusted the contrast, and fast-forwarded and rewound. His face was solemn, showing no emotion. Emma sat opposite him, her hands clenched, her heart pounding. After a few minutes of silence, he stopped the video and looked up at Emma. "Emma," he said slowly, "this doesn't look like a tumor." Emma blinked in confusion. "Sir, this is not cancer," he repeated. "It looks like a calcified granuloma, a rare type of infection, but definitely not a tumor." Emma couldn't believe her ears. She leaned forward. Can it be treated?" "Yes." He nodded. "If it's what I think it is, it can be surgically removed. It's a difficult procedure, but not as dangerous as those doctors said. This isn't a terminal illness, Emma. It can be cured." Emma's whole body froze, then flushed with warmth. She had expected doubt questions, but not a complete denial like this. She asked again, just to be sure, "Are you saying they were wrong?" "I believe they misread the scans," he replied. "The signs can be similar, especially if they were looking for a tumor. But its shape, position, and characteristics match a calcified granuloma. This is rare, but not unheard of." Tears streamed down Emma's face. All this time, everyone from Robert to the 5 doctors believed Johnson was dying. They looked at the same image and called it inoperable, terminal, hopeless. But a retired man without modern equipment saw the truth. "What do I do now?" she asked. Dr. Albert thought for a moment and then said, "You need to take this to someone who will listen. A surgeon. Someone who can look at the issue objectively. Bring all the evidence you have." Emma nodded. She knew what she had to do. Robert had money, power, and connections. If she showed him this, he would believe her. This wasn't a guess. It was evidence. Real, visible, undeniable evidence. With a new hope burning in her chest, Emma carefully put everything back in her bag. She copied the videos, printed more images. She planned every step, first to convince Robert, then to find another specialist for a second opinion. She knew she wasn't a doctor, but what she saw and what Dr. Albert had confirmed could not be ignored. Johnson doesn't have to die. The phrase repeated in her mind, giving her strength. That night she didn't sleep. She stayed up arranging the documents, writing notes, and preparing to face anyone who would doubt her. For the first time in months, she felt relieved. Not because the battle was over, but because now she had a real chance to win. She took one last look at the ultrasound image, the image that had changed everything. Now she just needed to prove it to the world. The next morning, Emma arrived at the hospital earlier than anyone else. She wore a simple outfit, but inside her old cloth bag was all the hope of a human being. She carried the USB with the ultrasound video, the printed images, and her detailed notes. Having stayed up all night, she had arranged everything carefully, like a prosecutor preparing for the most important case of her life. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from an iron determination. She requested to see one of the 5 doctors who had diagnosed Johnson. After nearly an hour of waiting in the cold hallway, a nurse finally led her into a room. The doctor, Dr. Harrison, a middle-aged man with graying hair and gold-rimmed glasses, was reviewing another file. He didn't even look up at her when he said, "What can I do for you?" Emma stepped forward, placing her bag on the table. Her voice was trembling but resolute. "Doctor, I am Emma, the Hargrove family's housekeeper. I have some evidence that there may have been a mistake in Johnson's diagnosis." Dr. Harrison stopped, slowly looking up. His gaze swept over her from head to toe, a look of condescending judgment. "I don't have time for baseless theories. If the family has any questions, they should contact us directly." Emma did not back down. "This isn't a theory. I have another ultrasound. It shows the mass is not a tumor, but a calcified granuloma." At this, a sneer appeared on Dr. Harrison's face. He took off his glasses and placed them on the table. "With all due respect," he said, his tone lowered but full of sarcasm, "you clean floors for a living. We have dedicated our lives to medicine. Do you think you can find something an entire team of top specialists missed?" A nurse standing in the corner of the room couldn't suppress a small laugh. Emma's entire body felt like it was on fire. The humiliation and contempt weren't just for her, but for all those who are considered invisible. She tried to stay calm, her voice growing stronger. "Please just watch this video. It will only take 2 minutes." "No," Dr. Harrison said decisively. He stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "I have reviewed Johnson's records very carefully. The diagnosis is correct. What you are doing is creating false hope, which is emotionally very dangerous for the family. Emma felt an invisible wall blocking her. She went to the second doctor, then the third. The answer was always a cold disdain. One said she misunderstood what she saw. Another sarcastically remarked, "If it were that simple, the specialists would have found it already." They didn't look at the evidence. They only looked at her status. Their arrogance was like a solid fortress wall, impenetrable. They didn't need to prove they were right because they were the miracle workers, and their word was the truth. Emma returned home in utter disappointment. She tried to contact Robert to report the situation, but was unsuccessful. The family's lawyers authorized by Robert had intervened. One of them called Emma, his voice rigid and cold. "Ms. Emma, we have received a report from the hospital. What you are doing is causing unnecessary disruption. The family has accepted the truth, and your spreading of false hope could cause serious psychological harm to Johnson and Mr. Robert." "But I have evidence!" Emma cried out, her voice breaking with helplessness. "Your evidence is merely the speculation of someone without medical expertise. If you continue to interfere with the boy's medical decisions, we will be forced to terminate your employment and ask you to leave this house." The threat was like a knife wound. It not only cut off her job, but also threatened her only connection to Johnson. That night, Emma sat in her room and cried, not because of the insults or the threats, but because of the fear that Johnson did not have much time left to wait for them to open their eyes. The boy was getting weaker by the day, his breathing more and more labored. But in her despair, a glimmer of light appeared. If they wouldn't help, she would find a way herself. She sat up, wiped her tears, and began to search online. She typed in keywords: misdiagnosis, rare childhood diseases, tracheal surgery. For hours, she scrolled through hundreds of websites, reading dozens of articles. And then she found a name, Dr. Adrian Keller. He was a world-renowned pediatric diagnostician known for his ability to review complex cases and find oversights that others had missed. He had worked with hospitals all over the world and published many books on rare diseases. Emma found an old email address from a medical article. She decided to do the most reckless thing of her life. She wrote a letter not as a professional, but as a person in despair. She recounted Johnson's entire story, from the doctor's verdict to her discovery and the hospital's rejection. She attached the ultrasound video, the scans, and her notes. She wrote only a short sentence at the end of the letter: "Please help. We have nothing left to lose." Then she sent it, her heart pounding, hoping for a miracle. 2 days later, Emma received a reply email. It had only a few words, but to her it contained a whole world of hope. "Bring the boy immediately." Holding the printed email, Emma ran to Robert's room. She waited in the hallway, refusing to be turned away. After more than an hour, Robert came out, his face etched with exhaustion and despair. Emma handed him the paper. "Please read this." He read it in silence, then looked up at her. "Who is this doctor?" he asked. Emma explained everything she knew about Dr. Keller. Robert was silent. He had trusted the best people in the country, and they had all betrayed him. But then Emma said a sentence that changed everything. "You just need to look into Johnson's eyes. He still wants to live." That night, Robert went to Johnson's room. The boy was awake, weak, but with his eyes open. Robert sat down by the bed. Johnson smiled weakly, then whispered, "Did my second mom find something, Daddy?" Robert looked at his son. A sense of guilt and love swelled within him. He had almost lost his son because of his own blind trust. He nodded, his voice trembling but firm. "Yes, she did. The next day, the entire house was in a frenzy. Luggage was prepared, medical records were printed, plane tickets were booked. Robert had made his final decision. They would fly to see Dr. Keller. It was a risky gamble, but it was also their only chance. Emma stood near the door watching Johnson being carefully carried into the car. A great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. This was not the end, but perhaps the beginning of a battle that no one believed could be won except for her. The flight to see Dr. Keller was kept an absolute secret. Robert didn't want anyone from the media to the 5 doctors to know about this journey. He chartered a private jet with only Johnson, Emma, Robert, and 2 medical support staff on board. Throughout the trip, the atmosphere was both tense and filled with a fragile hope. Johnson, though tired, kept asking Emma, "Will this trip make me better, Mommy?" Emma smiled, her voice full of conviction. "Yes, my love, it will." When they landed, a car was waiting to take them straight to Dr. Keller's clinic. The clinic was not as grand as the big hospitals in New York, but it exuded a sense of cleanliness, modernity, and professionalism. Dr. Keller greeted them at the door. He wasn't wearing a white lab coat, just a simple shirt and jeans. He shook Robert's hand, greeted Emma respectfully, and knelt to talk to Johnson in a warm voice. Then he got straight to work. Within an hour, new tests were completed. They used more advanced scanners, more precise imaging, and a comprehensive blood analysis. Everything was done quickly, but with great organization. Emma watched every step carefully while Robert remained by his son's side. That evening, Dr. Keller returned with the results in hand. He didn't beat around the bush. "This is not cancer," he said. "It's a granuloma, a hard mass caused by an untreated infection. It appears similar to cancer, but in fact it is not." Emma closed her eyes, a long sigh escaping her chest. Robert slumped into a chair, staring at the floor, not saying a word. Dr. Keller explained everything. A granuloma like this is often the body's attempt to isolate a respiratory infection. It walls off the infection in calcium, forming a solid mass. That's why it has a tumor-like appearance on the scans. It was compressing his windpipe, causing him difficulty breathing and speaking. But most importantly, it does not metastasize like cancer, and it can be removed. The treatment plan was clear: a simple endoscopic surgery to remove the mass, followed by antibiotics to ensure the infection didn't return. Recovery would only take a few weeks. Robert looked up, his face a mix of shock and relief. "So, my son isn't dying?" he asked, his voice trembling. "No," the doctor replied, "he is not." Robert buried his face in his hands, sobbing. He had trusted the top experts, and they had all been wrong. Emma sat quietly, trying to hold back her own tears. Dr. Keller placed the old and new scans side by side, and the difference was glaring. What the 5 doctors had called terminal cancer was in reality a removable mass. Robert couldn't comprehend it. 5 doctors, he repeated. 5 specialists. Not one of them saw it. Emma looked at him, saying nothing. The truth was too clear. The woman who cleaned the house and served meals had saved his son's life. It wasn't because she was lucky, but because she cared, paid attention, and never accepted giving up. 2 days later, the surgery was performed. Johnson was nervous, but remained calm. Emma held his hand as they prepared him. Robert stood nearby, watching everything. The surgery was done through the throat, using a small camera and specialized tools. There would be no major incision, and it would take less than 2 hours. After 1 hour and 40 minutes, Dr. Keller came out. "It's done," he said. "The surgery was perfect. The granuloma has been removed." Robert covered his face, trembling. Emma sat motionless, her eyes wide. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked. The doctor smiled. "Yes, he'll be just fine." They were allowed to see Johnson shortly after. He was still groggy, but his eyes were open. When he saw them, he smiled a real full smile, the first in weeks. And then he spoke. His voice was clear, no longer labored, no longer difficult. "Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom." Emma burst into tears. Robert was speechless. He knelt by the bed, taking his son's hand. Johnson took a deep breath and said, "I don't hurt anymore." Robert laughed and cried at the same time. "It's over, son. It's over." Emma stood beside them, one hand on Johnson's shoulder, the other covering her mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. All the fear, the pain, the disappointment, and the opposition had all led to this moment. Johnson wasn't dying. He was coming back to life. The story quickly leaked. A small blog by someone in the medical community heard the story and posted an article with a simple but powerful headline, "Billionaire's son diagnosed with terminal illness saved by a housekeeper." Within hours, it was picked up by larger news outlets. Social media exploded. People were shocked that 5 top doctors had made such a grave misdiagnosis, and even more surprised that a housekeeper with no medical degree was the one who had discovered the error. Debates erupted across medical forums, podcasts, and news programs. Some defended the doctors while others criticized the system. But one thing was clear: this story had captured global attention. It wasn't just about Johnson, but about trust, power, and the limits of expertise. Emma's name was everywhere. She was compared to heroes who had saved lives despite having no official authority. Universities offered her honorary doctorates. NGOs wanted her to speak at their events. Even health ministers from other countries wanted to meet her. But Emma remained silent. She turned down every interview. She didn't care for fame or attention. She just wanted people to listen to those who cared with all their hearts. Finally, she released one single statement through a journalist she trusted. It was just one sentence, but it was quoted in newspapers worldwide, printed on posters, and became an internet symbol. "No one listens to the servers, but the ones who care the most will see what others refuse to look at." Meanwhile, Robert had to confront his own feelings of guilt. He had blindly trusted the doctors and almost lost his son. He realized he had too easily dismissed Emma's warnings from the very beginning. To make amends, he hired an investigative team to look into the conduct of the 5 doctors. The investigation uncovered a mountain of evidence, internal emails and medical notes, that showed the doctors had rushed their diagnosis and ignored conflicting signs. It wasn't just a mistake, but professional negligence. An official medical board reviewed everything and released a public report confirming the initial diagnosis was wrong. They called it a case of systemic arrogance and a failure to reassess. Disciplinary actions were taken, medical licenses were suspended, and some were required to undergo retraining. The doctor who had sneered at Emma and called her a floor cleaner faced the most severe consequences. The investigation found multiple other cases where he had ignored test results and altered records to save time. He was charged with medical fraud and arrested. The hospital also had to pay a large settlement to Robert's family for the misdiagnosis and the emotional trauma they had caused. Emma didn't celebrate. To her, victory wasn't punishment. The real victory was seeing Johnson healthy and laughing. She spent her time helping the boy with his recovery, doing the simple things she had done before: reading books, playing chess, and preparing his meals. The media eventually moved on to other stories, but in that house everything had changed forever. Robert treated Emma with the respect she deserved. He listened to her opinions and made sure she was treated like a member of the family. Johnson, now fully recovered, often said, "Mom, Emma didn't just save my life. She believed in it." And for Emma, that was all she ever needed. In the days and months after Johnson's surgery, Robert dedicated all his time to his son. He canceled all important meetings and stepped away from multi-million-dollar financial deals. Now his world revolved entirely around Johnson, walking with him again, having dinner together, and laughing loudly at their favorite cartoons. He had once been a powerful man controlling a tech empire, but now he found the true meaning of life in the simplest of moments. The regret and guilt of nearly losing his son due to blind faith in experts haunted Robert. He had put his son's life in the hands of arrogant people who saw only a medical record and not a human being. To make amends, he took action. Robert used all his power and wealth to hire a team of lawyers and investigators determined to uncover every corner of the case. He wanted justice not only to be served, but also to change the entire system. The investigation revealed a terrible truth. It wasn't just negligence, but a blatant disregard for patients' lives. The doctor who had ridiculed Emma faced a criminal sentence for medical fraud and serious malpractice. The other doctors, after their licenses were suspended, also faced the collapse of their reputations and careers. But for Robert, true justice wasn't about punishment. Justice was Johnson being alive. And he knew that to ensure no other child had to endure what his son had gone through, he had to do something even greater. He established the Johnson Medical Foundation. The foundation's mission was simple yet powerful: to review terminal diagnoses, especially in children, and ensure no one was sent home to die while there was still hope. The most surprising thing was that Robert appointed Emma as the foundation's director. People in Robert's business and medical circles protested vehemently. "She has no medical degree, she has no management experience," they argued. But Robert didn't care. He had seen a truth they couldn't see. He knew Emma didn't need a degree to understand people and see what was hidden. She was the only person qualified for the position, for she had proven that love, care, and courage could change everything. Emma accepted the position quietly. She didn't hold a grand ceremony. She simply walked into the office, sat down at the desk, and began to work. Her job was not to make diagnoses, but to lead, to ask the right questions, and to ensure every medical record was meticulously reviewed. Life in Robert's mansion changed completely. The light had returned, not the light of crystal chandeliers, but the light from Johnson's clear laughter. The boy was no longer a weak, quiet child. Johnson ran all over the garden, played soccer with his father, and explored every corner of the house. His voice had returned clear, loud, and distinct. Emma still did her daily tasks, but now with immeasurable respect and reverence from Robert. He listened to her opinions shared with her about new projects, and always ensured she was treated as a member of the family. They had long, profound conversations, and the distance between boss and housekeeper was gone. Robert told Emma about the loneliness of losing his wife, about the fear of almost losing his son. Emma also shared the pain of losing her own child, about the nights she stayed up researching medicine, all so that no other mother would have to endure the pain she had. Their relationship developed naturally. It wasn't a cliched romance, but a connection built on mutual understanding, respect, and a shared pain that had healed. Together they built a new family, one that was imperfect, but filled with love and trust. Johnson felt it. The boy would often hold both their hands and say, "We're a team, right?" And the answer was always, "Yes, we're a team." The mansion was now full of life. Johnson began writing letters, not emails, but colorful handwritten letters. He sent them to children's hospitals, to children fighting illnesses. His message was always the same: never just believe what a doctor tells you. Sometimes what you need is someone who truly loves you and never gives up. These letters brought hope to thousands of families. Emma kept all the response letters in a wooden box. Johnson called it his hope box. When the boy had a bad day, she would take a letter out and read it aloud. He believed that if just one child was saved because of his story, all the pain they had gone through was worth it. Emma's life had changed. She was no longer an anonymous housekeeper. She was a symbol. To some, she represented the voice of the overlooked. To others, she was proof that love and care can see more than experience and degrees. And to Johnson, she was still always his second mom, the one who fought and never let him fall. The medical foundation she led helped thousands of families. She didn't seek fame or praise. She just wanted to ensure that no child had to die without someone asking one more time. Are we absolutely sure the story of Emma and Johnson wasn't a fairy tale? It was a story of courage, of love, of a woman who refused to accept fate and changed a world. As they watched Johnson run and play on the lawn, Robert and Emma knew they had won not just a battle, but a life. They had found meaning in pain, found strength in weakness, and found light from the unseen. The mansion, once a place of sorrow, was now a place filled with laughter, love, and never-ending hope. The sunset descended, painting the house in gold. But inside, something new had begun, a new chapter of life, illuminated by love, persistence, and an undying belief. Johnson was not only saved, but it was the love and belief in life that changed everything. The story of Emma and Johnson proves that sometimes the people we overlook, those whom society doesn't value, are the ones who can change destiny. When power and doctors couldn't do anything, love and perseverance were the keys to hope. Remember, nothing is impossible if we don't give up on believing in the good. If this story made you reflect, don't forget to share it with those around you, to spread inspiration and hope. Make sure to like and subscribe for more inspiring and motivational stories. Thank you for watching.